My name is the I. I observe what others overlook. I study what others avoid. And tonight, we examine a case that blurred the line between justice and spectacle. On June 12, 1994, in Brentwood, Los Angeles, 2 lives were taken with shocking brutality. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found murdered outside a quiet condominium. The scene was violent, personal, overwhelming. It did not look random. It looked intimate. Almost immediately, attention turned toward a man whose face was already known across America. O.J. Simpson was not a stranger to the spotlight. He was an NFL legend, a Hall of Famer, a broadcaster, an actor. For decades, he represented charisma, success, and the polished image of the American dream. He was admired, trusted, marketable. But behind that image were years of documented domestic abuse allegations. Police reports, 911 calls filled with fear, a relationship marked by jealousy, volatility, and control. What followed the murders was unlike anything the justice system had ever seen. A slow-speed police chase in a white Ford Bronco broadcast live to millions. A courtroom transformed into primetime entertainment. Attorneys turned into celebrities. A trial that divided a nation along racial, cultural, and emotional lines. This was not simply a murder case. It became a national mirror, a collision between fame and accountability, between public perception and forensic evidence, between narrative and truth. Because when celebrity walks into a courtroom, the rules of reality begin to bend. And the question that still echoes decades later is not only whether he was guilty. It is how power, image, and psychology can shape what millions are willing to believe. In the early hours of June 13, 1994, the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were discovered outside Nicole's condominium in Brentwood, Los Angeles. The scene was chaotic and deeply violent. Nicole had been stabbed multiple times. Ron Goldman, who had simply come to return a pair of glasses left at a restaurant, was also brutally killed. There were defensive wounds. There were signs of a struggle. This was not random. It felt personal, focused, overkill. Very quickly, investigators turned their attention to Nicole's ex-husband, O.J. Simpson. At the time, Simpson was one of the most recognizable men in America. A former NFL superstar with the Buffalo Bills, a Hall of Famer, a sports commentator, a commercial spokesman and actor. He had transcended sports. He was marketable, charismatic, and widely perceived as non-threatening. That public persona would become one of the most powerful psychological elements of the case. But behind the polished image was a documented history of domestic violence. Police had been called to the couple's home multiple times. In 1989, Simpson pleaded no contest to spousal abuse. There were 911 calls in which Nicole's voice could be heard trembling in fear. Friends described a relationship defined by control, jealousy, and intimidation. Psychologically, patterns of coercive control and possessiveness often escalate when the controlling partner senses loss of dominance. By 1994, Nicole had moved on. She was building independence. For someone with narcissistic traits and a deep need for control, that shift can feel like humiliation. The night of the murders, Simpson claimed he was home preparing for a late-night flight to Chicago. But investigators quickly found blood evidence at the crime scene that appeared to match him. A trail of blood drops was discovered leading away from the bodies. A bloody glove was found near the scene, and its mate was later found at Simpson's estate on Rockingham Avenue. There were cuts on Simpson's hand when police interviewed him. He claimed he had cut himself on broken glass in his hotel room after learning of Nicole's death. Then came the moment that transformed the case from criminal investigation to cultural phenomenon. On June 17, 1994, after being charged with the murders, Simpson did not turn himself in as planned. Instead, he became the subject of one of the most surreal events in American history, the white Ford Bronco chase. Simpson sat in the back seat of a white Ford Bronco driven by his friend Al Cowlings, while police followed slowly down Los Angeles highways. Millions of viewers watched live on television. Networks interrupted the NBA Finals to broadcast the pursuit. It was as if the entire nation had paused to witness a slow-motion unraveling. Psychologically, the chase revealed something complex. Reports later suggested Simpson had a gun and possibly contemplated suicide. Narcissistic collapse, when an individual who has built an identity around admiration and control faces public disgrace, can trigger extreme behavior. The idea of surrendering quietly may have felt incompatible with his self-image. Instead, the spectacle amplified his presence. Even in crisis, the narrative centered on him. The trial began in January 1995 and would become known as the trial of the century. It was televised daily. Lawyers became household names. The prosecution, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, faced a formidable defense team that included Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, and Robert Kardashian. The defense strategy was not simply about disproving evidence. It was about reframing the entire case. They argued that Simpson was the victim of police misconduct and racial bias, focusing heavily on Detective Mark Furman, who had a documented history of racist statements. In the context of Los Angeles, only a few years after the Rodney King beating and the ensuing riots, distrust of the police ran deep in many communities. The defense understood the social psychology of the moment. They shifted the jury's attention from "did he do it?" to "can you trust the system accusing him?" One of the most pivotal moments came when Simpson was asked to try on the leather gloves found at the crime scene. In court, he appeared to struggle pulling them over latex gloves. The image was powerful. Johnny Cochran delivered the now famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." The phrase was simple, rhythmic, and psychologically potent. Jurors are human. Visual impressions and memorable phrases can weigh heavily, sometimes more than forensic nuance. The prosecution presented DNA evidence linking Simpson to the scene. Blood at the crime site matching Simpson, Nicole, and Goldman. Blood found in Simpson's vehicle. Blood on socks in his bedroom. At the time, DNA analysis was still relatively new to the public. Many jurors struggled to fully grasp its scientific weight. The defense raised questions about contamination and mishandling, planting seeds of doubt. In criminal trials, doubt is decisive. Throughout the proceedings, Simpson maintained a controlled demeanor. He wore conservative suits. He took notes. He appeared attentive. He avoided emotional outbursts. For someone accustomed to cameras and public life, the courtroom was not alien territory. Impression management, the ability to consciously shape how others perceive you, appeared central to his strategy. Research in social psychology shows that individuals with strong self-monitoring skills can adapt behavior effectively to different audiences. Simpson had decades of experience performing under scrutiny. On October 3, 1995, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, not guilty. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some celebrated, others were stunned. The divide often followed racial lines, reflecting deeper tensions in American society. The case had become larger than two victims. It was now entangled with history, mistrust, media saturation, and celebrity power. But the story did not end there. In 1997, a civil wrongful death lawsuit filed by the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman found Simpson liable for the deaths. The standard of proof in civil court is lower than in criminal court. This time, the jury concluded he was responsible. He was ordered to pay millions in damages. Years later, in 2007, Simpson was arrested in Las Vegas in connection with an armed robbery involving sports memorabilia. In 2008, he was convicted and sentenced to 33 years in prison, serving 9 before being paroled in 2017. For many observers, the conviction felt like delayed accountability, though unrelated legally to the 1994 murders. Psychologically, the case remains a study in how identity, power, and narrative interact with justice. Simpson's public persona had been carefully constructed over decades. He was seen as transcending racial categories, famously quoted as saying, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." That statement reflects a form of identity positioning. aligning with mainstream acceptance rather than collective struggle. Yet during the trial, race became central to the defense strategy. The narrative shifted depending on context. This adaptability suggests a pragmatic approach to identity, guided less by principle and more by self-preservation. The dynamics of domestic violence also loom large in retrospective analysis. Intimate partner homicides frequently follow patterns of escalating control, jealousy, and fear of abandonment. When a controlling partner perceives permanent loss, the risk of lethal violence increases significantly. While the criminal court acquitted him, many behavioral experts examining the documented history of abuse see consistent warning signs. The media's role cannot be overstated. The 24-hour news cycle was still developing in the mid-1990s, and this case accelerated it. Courtroom moments became daily entertainment. Legal arguments were dissected like sports commentary. The line between reporting and spectacle blurred. Media saturation can shape public perception dramatically. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity can soften critical scrutiny. In the end, the case forces uncomfortable questions. How much does fame influence investigation? How much does charisma affect jurors? Can a carefully cultivated image create reasonable doubt? And when a trial becomes a referendum on institutions rather than a focus on victims, what gets lost? The murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman remain the core tragedy. 2 lives ended violently, 2 families permanently scarred. Yet the case evolved into something broader, a psychological study of celebrity, race, media, and the fragile architecture of public trust. It demonstrated how narrative can compete with evidence, how perception can rival proof, and how, in the modern age, justice does not unfold in silence. It unfolds under lights, under cameras, and in the court of public opinion. The case of O.J. Simpson was never just about a verdict. It was about perception. It was about how fame can blur accountability, how charisma can compete with evidence, how a courtroom can become a stage. 2 people lost their lives, Nicole Brown Simpson, Ron Goldman, and yet, for many, the memory of the trial overshadowed the memory of the victims. That is the power of narrative. This case forced society to confront uncomfortable truths. Justice is not decided in a vacuum. It exists inside culture, inside politics, inside history, and sometimes inside celebrity. It showed how doubt can be amplified, how public opinion can fracture, how truth can feel negotiable when identity and power enter the room. Fame does not make someone innocent, but it can make them untouchable. Charisma does not equal character. Confidence does not equal truth. And a performance can sometimes echo louder than facts. The lesson here is not about choosing sides. It is about awareness. Question narratives. Examine evidence. Separate emotion from analysis. Because when perception replaces critical thinking, justice becomes fragile. If this case made you uncomfortable, it should. If it made you think, even better. Subscribe for more deep true crime analysis, psychological breakdowns, and cases that challenge what we believe we understand about power, manipulation, and the human mind. And if you have a story, one that still lingers in the dark, one that you've never told anyone, send it, if you have the courage. Until next time, remember, the truth doesn't disappear. It waits, and I'm always watching.